Video, we talked about making the distinctions between total addressable markets, serviceable addressable markets, and then share of markets. And if you've missed that video, I encourage you to go back and take a look at it because it provides us with some good background information and a framework for which to think through. Now, ultimately, we're trying to figure out the potential market size for an idea so that we can evaluate the potential of that idea. Ultimately, we're going to get to a point in the next video where we're actually doing some calculations. And the purpose of those calculations is going to be for us to be able to estimate the number of customers that we might be able to gain so that we can verify the potential value of the idea and see if it's something that is of interest to us. And ultimately, if our business model can support or can be supported by that number of customers. So in this video, what we're going to be talking about specifically is this idea of a target market. Now, if you remember from our last video, we walked through kind of the larger total addressable market, the smaller serviceable addressable market, and then the share of market. And what we need to be able to do is be able to identify who is our actual customer. So our target market is really all about trying to estimate or trying to define what I call the first customer. And this is going to be a list of characteristics that kind of and hopefully delineate just every other customer from the first person that's going to buy from us. And I use the terminology first customer because if you ever think about when a new product comes out, and they do like a big product release and there's a long line of people waiting for it, who's the first person in line, right? That's the person that is the most excited about the particular product. And we want to think about, out of all the people that are going to purchase it, who's the person that is most excited for this? While our business ideas and our products and services that we plan on creating may carry broad appeal, we really want to think about the first person who is likely to pay the most money for it because they have the most significant problem. And then our solution would be a perfect remedy for that problem. Now, we commonly in technology refer to this person as the early adopter. And we like early adopters for a number of different reasons, most of which because they are very, very willing to try new things, right? And that by definition really helps us, especially if we have a new product that has very little traction and very little name recognition. But early adopters are very, very important. So we want to think through the lens of who is our first customer. Now, in order to provide some specifics that are going to be helpful to us, we do want to start putting a few characteristics on who we believe to be this individual. So there are a couple of different characteristics that we can think about when trying to describe our customer from kind of easiest, I should say, to maybe most difficult. The first thing that we can think about are what we call demographics. Demographics simply represent what we call observable characteristics, right? Things that are very easy to identify that we can use to separate our larger market. So if you were to have, if this circle were to represent our total available market, we know that not everyone in this particular market is going to respond uniquely to our particular solution. So what we want to try to do is we want to, with certain characteristics, cut the market up into smaller pieces. So much so that when we're done, we might have a segment of this market that has enough people that will respond to the value proposition that we have, right? What we're trying to offer that really is so excited about the benefit that we are providing that they'll ultimately pay for. So demographics are a great way of doing this. And the great thing about them is we can use demographics to really kind of segment the market and to determine the number of people that might have an interest in our idea. So in terms of demographic characteristics or variables, we can use a few different things. So the first most obvious thing that we can use it would be gender, we can use age, we can use income, we can use education, and even ethnicity. You could also use kind of household composition as well, but that gets more into kind of psychographic, but we can use other things. So the reason why I really like these variables is because you can use government databases, and in the next video we'll kind of walk through how to do this, to determine the percentage of people within a market that fit those characteristics. And that can help us better identify how many people within an area would potentially respond to our solution. So only use the things that are really relevant, but if you're selling a product that maybe caters to more affluent, then income is probably going to be a pretty important thing. Now, sometimes income is hard to come by because people tend to not want to divulge and that sort of thing. So education is a good backup because we know that education level, at least generally speaking, is in many ways correlated to incomes. But think about the things that make sense for your idea. The next thing that you can think about are geographics. Now, geographics, as you're probably imagining, really refers to kind of physical location of where people are. So things that might be relevant could be the zip code, could be region, if that's relevant from a supply perspective, could be city, right? I mean, you can chunk it up any way you want to. If you're a physical business that has a brick and mortar location, like the example I provided in the prior video, we talked about coffee shops and retailers. You might have a zip code, right, that you kind of serve in that particular area. So only if this is relevant. Again, if you're an online retailer that has wider distribution, maybe you're not necessarily focusing on a specific region, but it might be relevant to you. The next thing to think about are what we call psychographic variables. Now, psychographic variables include things like lifestyle, things like interests, and even hobbies. Psychographic variables are a little bit more difficult to estimate because you're relying a little bit more on less available information, but are a great way to describe your customer. So instead of saying, well, my customer is between the ages, or I would encourage you to be a little bit more specific, but let's say between the ages of 25 and 34, and has an income of $45,000 or greater. That could be one way of describing your target market using demographic variables. Now, the benefit of that is that we can, through government census data, determine the percentage of the population between 25 and 34 that makes above 45,000, so we can better estimate our market. But that might not help you completely. You might say also, well, that could be my market, but my market really is people that enjoy whitewater rafting, or people that like rock climbing, or that read a particular type of magazine, or whatever the case is. So you can describe your market based upon the things that they do, based upon their interests, based upon their hobbies. And then, of course, you have to try to estimate, well, what's the number of people that do those sorts of things? And there are ways of doing that. So these are really three different ways that we can evaluate and describe our target customers. And so what I would encourage you to do is to try to make a list of characteristics, right? If you were to just take your customer and list very specific things, try to identify as much as you can. Now, there's a couple things to think about. On the range of kind of developing your customer, we have kind of the very kind of broad area here, or very general, and then we have very specific. So two of the things that I typically see are, one, people tend to navigate kind of towards this section here where we describe our customer in very broad terms. And while you're going to get a lot of people that fit those characteristics, the problem is going to be that you're kind of inflating the potential number of people that have a need for this idea. And remember, we really want to focus on who's our first customer. Who's the person that has the greatest need for the product that we're going to produce? Now, the other kind of way is we can be very, very specific. So specific that we eventually whittle down this market and literally like 5 people fit those characteristics. So that also is very, very bad, because we know that hopefully our product appeals to more than 5 people. So it is a little bit of a balancing act. I would encourage you to venture more towards kind of the specific region here, just so we can better estimate the idea. We don't really do ourselves any favors if we are being very, very broad, because when we first start our business, we want to think about who am I going to market to? And if we market to a kind of broad group of customers, the challenge is that our message is really going to fall flat. It's not going to be very appealing. But if we know exactly who is the person that's going to want to spend money for this, we can develop a very specific and targeted message to that particular person versus the broader market. And we know that when we start a business, we have a limited amount of resources, and we don't want to necessarily spend a lot of money trying to appeal towards people that have a less of a likelihood of really liking what we do. We want to appeal to those people that we think are going to be fanatical about what we do. So I hope that helps you kind of think through some of the particulars with identifying, or at least determining, the number of people that we believe fall into our target market. As I mentioned before, I would encourage you to make just a kind of a targeted list of different kind of characteristics that ultimately will appeal or describe your customer. And then we can use that information in our next video to try to actually quantify the number of people who might have an interest in our product, and then we can try and quantify the potential value of this business idea that we have.